Most men don't want to hear but need to. You might think you're in a healthy relationship or interaction, but in reality, someone could be quietly controlling you, and you don't even realize it. That's the harsh reality of emotional blackmail. It's invisible, subtle, and often disguised as care, love, or concern. The most dangerous part? It doesn't feel like manipulation at first. It feels like obligation, guilt, or responsibility. And before you know it, your energy, decisions, and even self-respect are no longer yours. Many men grow up believing that being good, kind, loyal, responsible, and patient will automatically earn respect and fairness. That if you do everything right, people will treat you well. Unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. Emotional blackmailers exploit these assumptions. They don't have to threaten physically or be overtly aggressive. They rely on a much more subtle weapon: your willingness to care and your fear of conflict. Let me be blunt. Emotional blackmail is not a sign of your failure or weakness. It is a reflection of how the other person manipulates human psychology to gain control. And the most controversial part? Many men are complicit in their own control without realizing it. By caring too much, over-explaining, or avoiding confrontation, they hand over authority over their own decisions. Every ignored boundary, every tolerated guilt trip, and every silent sacrifice reinforces the manipulator's power. Here's what makes emotional blackmail so dangerous. It's rarely obvious. People using it rarely say, "I'm controlling you." Instead, they frame it as concern, love, or fairness. They say things like, "If you really cared, you would," or "After everything I've done for you, you owe me this." And because you care, you comply. Not because you want to, but because you feel pressured, guilty, or responsible. Over time, this erodes confidence, independence, and clarity, leaving men trapped in dynamics that quietly strip away influence and respect. This is why this topic is so critical for men. Understanding emotional blackmail is not about being cynical or cold. It's about awareness. It's about seeing the invisible patterns in relationships and interactions. It's about recognizing when your energy, your time, and your decisions are being subtly redirected by someone else, often someone you trust. If you ignore the signs, you remain vulnerable. If you learn to recognize them, you regain control. Here's the uncomfortable reality that will make most men squirm. Niceness, patience, and loyalty can actually make you a target. Yes, the quality society praises in men, the ones that earn compliments and social approval, are often the same qualities that manipulators exploit. Why? Because people who are predictable, dependable, and eager to please are easier to influence. They are less likely to push back, more likely to comply, and more prone to guilt. Emotional blackmail thrives in this environment. It doesn't need threats. It doesn't need confrontation. It works quietly, efficiently, and almost invisibly. And because it often masquerades as care or concern, many men don't recognize it until significant damage has been done, until they feel trapped, frustrated, or powerless. By then, the control is embedded in habits, decisions, and emotional patterns. So, what are the stakes? Your time, energy, and self-respect. Emotional blackmail can influence your work, relationships, and even your mental state. It makes you react rather than act. It trains you to tolerate behavior that undermines your value. And worst of all, it normalizes control. What starts as small concessions and guilt eventually becomes a framework in which your choices are constrained, your independence is compromised, and your confidence erodes. Here's the wake-up call. Men, being manipulated emotionally is not a moral failing. It's a lesson in awareness and strategy. It's not about becoming cold, manipulative, or selfish. It's about understanding patterns, protecting your boundaries, and responding to influence intentionally rather than reflexively. Knowing the signs of emotional blackmail is not cynicism, it's self-preservation. In this video, we're going to break down 7 critical signs that you're being emotionally controlled. Each one is subtle, relatable, and rooted in psychology. You may recognize behaviors you've tolerated or patterns you've unknowingly reinforced. And that recognition is a first step toward reclaiming control over your life, your decisions, and your self-respect. The most controversial truth of all? Many men lose influence, respect, and energy not because of weakness or misfortune, but because they never notice a quiet manipulation happening around them. And once you see it, once you understand it, you can stop complying unconsciously, stop over-explaining, stop being trapped by guilt or obligation, and start taking control of your interactions. So get ready. This isn't just a discussion about relationships. It's a guide to understanding human behavior, protecting your boundaries, and reclaiming authority over your life. If you've ever felt drained, overlooked, or powerless despite your effort, this video will shine a light on why and how to respond effectively. 1. You feel guilt for everything you do. One of the first and most powerful signs of emotional blackmail is constant guilt. You start to notice that no matter what you do, it's never enough. Every decision, every action, every moment of independence seems to trigger discomfort, criticism, or subtle reproach. And the person controlling you doesn't even need to raise their voice or threaten you directly. Guilt does the work silently. Here's how it works. Humans are wired to respond to social and emotional cues. When someone you care about expresses disappointment, hurt, or frustration, your instinct is to fix it, compensate, or apologize. Emotional manipulators exploit this instinct. They use it deliberately, creating a system where your emotions are constantly regulated by their reactions. You start second-guessing yourself, doubting your choices, and prioritizing their feelings over your own judgment. You might think, I'm just being considerate, or I care about this person, so I should adjust. That's true up to a point, but emotional blackmail doesn't operate within reasonable boundaries. It doesn't allow compromise or negotiation. It creates a cycle. A small request or critique leads to guilt. Guilt leads to compliance, and compliance reinforces the manipulator's control. Over time, you find that your decisions, your time, and even your moods are shaped by a quiet fear causing emotional upset. For instance, imagine a man who decides to spend a weekend with friends, something he rarely does. On telling his partner, she sighs heavily, comments on how she'll be lonely, and mentions everything she's done for him recently. Suddenly, he feels tension, obligation, and unease. He might cancel plans, not because he wants to, but because the subtle guilt outweighs his personal preference. The act of caring and maintaining harmony becomes a trap. His attention and energy are now directed by her emotional pressure rather than his own choice. What's happening here is not love or concern. It's control. Emotional blackmailers rely on guilt because it's internalized and self-regulating. Unlike anger, shouting, or threats, guilt doesn't create resistance. Instead, it quietly motivates compliance, making you think you're choosing to act out of care or responsibility when, in reality, you're responding to manipulation. Relatable? Most men have experienced moments like this, feeling obligated to do something that goes against their preference, timing, or comfort because someone else's emotions force the choice. At first, it seems minor. You justify it as being considerate or respectful. But repeated small concessions build into a pattern where your energy, time, and attention are no longer yours. The guilt becomes automatic. You act before thinking, hoping to avoid conflict or disappointment. Here's another point to notice. Emotional blackmail often disguises itself as moral reasoning. The manipulator might say things like, if you really love me, you'd, or I've done so much for you. Can't you just... These statements are carefully crafted to trigger self-doubt and guilt. They're framed as fairness, love, or care, but the underlying message is always the same. Your value and choices are contingent on their approval. Men often fail to recognize this because they are wired to be loyal, responsible, and solution-oriented. You care about outcomes and try to make others happy. That's a strength until it's exploited. When you are constantly responding to guilt, you stop acting intentionally. Your decisions are reactive, shaped by someone else's emotional leverage. This pattern erodes confidence, self-respect, and autonomy. The wake-up call here is simple. If you feel guilty for asserting basic boundaries, pursuing your interests, or making reasonable decisions, pause and reflect. Guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's a signal that someone else is using your empathy against you. Recognizing this is a first step toward reclaiming your energy and autonomy. The challenge for men is to maintain care and respect while resisting guilt-driven compliance. You don't stop being considerate, loyal, or supportive. You stop letting guilt dictate your choices. You recognize that your decisions are yours, and that others' emotional reactions should inform discussion, not control. This awareness is a foundation for all other steps in protecting yourself from emotional blackmail. When you understand this first sign, you start noticing patterns in other interactions. You realize that guilt is often a tool of influence, not a reflection of moral failure. You can respond thoughtfully instead of reflexively. You can preserve your energy, maintain boundaries, and regain control over your decisions, all without becoming cold, uncaring, or detached. The truth is uncomfortable, and that's why it's so powerful. Most men tolerate this quietly, believing it's part of being a good partner, friend, or colleague. But tolerance is a problem. Compliance disguised as kindness only reinforces control. Awareness, not guilt-driven action, is the path to freedom. The first step: notice when guilt is controlling your choices. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to, or because someone else made me feel obligated? Once you see it, you can act intentionally, and the subtle chains of emotional manipulation start to break. 2. Your decisions are constantly questioned. One of the clearest signs that someone is trying to control you emotionally is that your decisions are never fully respected. Every choice you make seems to be scrutinized, challenged, or criticized, subtly or overtly. The underlying message is always the same. You cannot be trusted to make the right choice without their approval. And over time, this creates a habit of second-guessing yourself, deferring to others, and seeking permission for decisions that should be entirely yours. Most men are raised to solve problems, fix situations, and maintain harmony. These are strengths. But they also make men more vulnerable to emotional manipulation. When someone constantly questions your choices, it taps into your desire to do what's right, to avoid conflict, and to maintain peace. It creates a tension that feels like responsibility, but in reality, it's control. Every decision becomes a negotiation of your independence, a subtle tug-of-war over your freedom to act according to your judgment. You can relate to this in everyday life. Have you ever felt that no matter what path you take, someone is there to comment, criticize, or correct your decision? Maybe it's about how you spend your time, where you focus your energy, or how you communicate with others. When these patterns repeat consistently, it erodes confidence. You start to doubt not just individual choices, but your ability to make decisions at all. And that self-doubt is exactly what someone wielding emotional influence wants. This constant questioning doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. It can be as subtle as a raised eyebrow, a sigh, or a comment that suggests your decision is irresponsible or selfish. The effect is cumulative. Over time, you become hesitant, cautious, and overly conscious of how others perceive your actions. You stop acting decisively and start measuring every move against how it might be received. Independence is replaced by conformity. Not because you lack judgment, but because someone else has trained you to doubt yourself. The challenge here is psychological. Men are often unaware of how much mental energy is being siphoned off by this dynamic. You might feel constantly on edge or drained after interactions, sensing tension even when no overt argument occurs. Your instinct is to explain, justify, or adjust your decisions to avoid conflict. And the more you do this, the stronger the influence becomes. Emotional blackmail thrives on compliance that feels voluntary, but is actually conditioned over time. Recognizing this pattern is crucial. When someone constantly questions your judgment, it's not just criticism. It's a signal that your autonomy is being undermined. The goal of emotional control is not to help or guide you. It's to create dependency, uncertainty, and a sense that your decisions are never enough on their own. Once you notice this, the power dynamic shifts. Awareness allows you to step back and separate the other person's opinions from your right to act independently. This dynamic also impacts confidence in subtle ways. You may start feeling the need to over-justify decisions in social, professional, or personal settings. You may overanalyze every possible outcome, seeking reassurance from others rather than trusting your own judgment. And you may tolerate behavior that would otherwise be unacceptable, all in the name of avoiding confrontation or maintaining peace. Here's the critical insight for men. Your ability to make decisions is one of your most valuable assets. When someone undermines that ability, they are not simply criticizing you. They are quietly asserting control over your life. Autonomy is not negotiable. It is a foundation of self-respect, influence, and personal power. Every moment you doubt your judgment because someone else conditioned you to do so is a moment they gain leverage over your choices, energy, and confidence. The wake-up point is simple but often ignored. Questioning your autonomy under emotional pressure is not harmless. It slowly erodes confidence and creates habits of compliance, making you reactive instead of deliberate. Over time, you may lose clarity about what you truly want, what you believe, and what you are willing to accept. This is a quiet danger of emotional blackmail. It doesn't attack you openly. It reshapes your behavior from the inside. To regain control, awareness is the first step. Recognize the patterns, separate opinions from influence, and remember that your decisions are yours to make. Confidence is built in the act of choosing, without unnecessary approval or guilt. Independence is reinforced each time you act deliberately, even when someone doubts or questions you. And the more you honor your right to decide, the less power others have over your energy, your actions, and your sense of self. Emotional blackmail thrives in uncertainty, self-doubt, and hesitation. By noticing that your decisions are constantly questioned, you can identify the pattern before it erodes your autonomy completely. The goal isn't confrontation. It's clarity, control, and awareness. Once you understand this, you begin reclaiming influence over your life, energy, and choices, refusing to let subtle manipulation dictate your free. You often feel trapped or obligated. One of the most dangerous signs of emotional blackmail is that you frequently feel trapped or obligated in your relationships and interactions. This feeling doesn't come from external rules, schedules, or responsibilities. It comes from someone quietly steering your choices, your time, and even your thoughts. And here's the uncomfortable truth most men refuse to admit. You often allow it to happen. Men are taught to be loyal, responsible, and dependable. These are virtues, but they can also make men vulnerable to manipulation. Emotional blackmailers rely on these qualities because they know men are conditioned to tolerate discomfort, avoid conflict, and maintain peace at all costs. So, instead of asserting boundaries or saying no, you comply, you accommodate, and you rationalize the situation. Over time, you may feel that your life is less yours and more dictated by the subtle influence of others. Here's where the criticism comes in. Too many men are blind to this pattern until it's deeply entrenched. They pride themselves on patience, loyalty, and understanding, yet fail to recognize when these very traits are being exploited. You endure guilt trips, tolerate unreasonable demands, and adjust your priorities constantly, all while thinking you're being a good person. But being good does not require being controlled. Complying silently does not prove your worth. It only trains others to expect compliance. Feeling trapped often shows up as mental tension, stress, and subtle resentment. You may find yourself constantly thinking about obligations, anticipating someone else's reactions, or modify your behavior to avoid conflict. You may even feel that your freedom to act independently is shrinking. The irony is that while men are often praised for patience and reliability, those same traits can become the very mechanisms that allow emotional blackmail to thrive. Wake up to this reality. You are not powerless. Your time, your energy, and your choices belong to you. Feeling obligated or trapped is not a reflection of your moral failing. It is a reflection of boundaries that were never asserted. When you notice that someone's influence consistently shapes your actions, it's a signal to pause, evaluate, and reclaim control. This is not about becoming cold, rigid, or unkind. It's about being deliberate with your decisions, energy, and attention. Too many men allow patterns of manipulation to persist because they confuse discomfort with failure. They tolerate it quietly, thinking that avoiding conflict proves strength or character. But avoidance doesn't prove strength. It trains others to test limits, push boundaries, and dictate outcomes. The longer you allow subtle control to continue, the more entrenched it becomes. The chains of obligation tighten slowly, often without you noticing until frustration, resentment, or exhaustion has taken root. Here's the advice men need to hear. Stop tolerating influence disguised as care, obligation, or concern. It's time to wake up. Evaluate where your decisions are being shaped by guilt, pressure, or subtle manipulation. Recognize that your energy is finite, and every moment spent complying unconsciously is a moment that diminishes your autonomy. Protecting your time, setting boundaries, and asserting your independence are not selfish acts. They are acts of self-respect and clarity. It's also crucial to notice your patterns. Reflect honestly. When did you last make a decision without hesitation or concern about someone else's reaction? When did you last prioritize your judgment over guilt, obligation, or fear of disappointing someone? If these moments are rare, it's a signal that emotional influence is guiding your behavior more than you realize. Awareness is a first step toward regaining control. The wake-up call here is uncomfortable but necessary. Being manipulated emotionally is not about weakness. It's about awareness. Many men fail to see the subtle ways in which their own tolerance and desire to maintain peace are exploited. They blame external factors, rationalize the control, or convince themselves it's part of being a good partner or friend. But the reality is that influence without consent is still control, and your role in allowing it matters. True strength is not measured by silent endurance. It is measured by awareness, clarity, and deliberate action. Strength is asserting your boundaries, protecting your energy, and refusing to let guilt, obligation, or subtle pressure dictate your choices. When men wake up to this, they reclaim autonomy, confidence, and influence. They stop reacting unconsciously and start acting intentionally. They stop being controlled and start leading their own lives. The final point, feeling trapped, is a signal, not a verdict. It's an opportunity to examine patterns, reclaim autonomy, and respond intentionally. Stop tolerating behavior that undermines your independence. Stop confusing patience with submission. Stop assuming discomfort equals responsibility. Wake up, take control. Your decisions, your time, and your energy are yours, and recognizing that is a first step toward breaking free from emotional blackmail. Here's a statement that most men will immediately resist, but it's a reality you need to hear. Being manipulated emotionally is not someone else's fault. It's a reflection of how you allow yourself to be treated. Yes, that's uncomfortable. Yes, it challenges everything society tells men about patience, loyalty, and being good. But here's the truth. No one can control you without your silent consent. Emotional blackmail only works because you permit it. You comply, over-explain, tolerate guilt, and avoid asserting boundaries. That is the real power they're exploiting. For decades, men have been told that patience, kindness, and understanding are virtues that automatically earn respect. That if you are loyal and consistent, people will respond in kind. That caring more should produce better outcomes. Here's the controversial part. In the real world, these qualities often make you a target. The traits that are praised in moral narratives are exactly the traits manipulators exploit to quietly gain control over your decisions, energy, and self-worth. Being nice doesn't protect you. It makes you predictable, available, and unfortunately, easier to manipulate. If that stings, it should. Because most men have been taught to ignore subtle influence. They tolerate discomfort to appear strong. They comply to avoid conflict. They rationalize manipulation as concern, care, or fairness. And the more they tolerate it, the more control others gain. By the time many men recognize the patterns, their energy is depleted, their confidence shaken, and their independence quietly eroded. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about turning you into someone cold, harsh, or manipulative. It's about awareness, clarity, and reclaiming control. The moment you recognize that emotional blackmail is functioning in your life, you gain the power to respond intentionally rather than react unconsciously. You can begin prioritizing your decisions, your energy, and your boundaries without guilt. And here's the crucial insight. The more deliberate you are, the less leverage anyone else has over you. Here's something else most men don't realize. Emotional manipulation thrives on silence. It thrives when you don't notice it. It thrives when you assume that tolerance is strength, patience is virtue, and compromise is always good. The moment you recognize subtle influence, the entire dynamic changes. Suddenly, what once drained you no longer has power. Your energy returns. Your decisions feel like your own, and your respect, both from others and from yourself, begins to grow. This is where I want to create a connection with you, the viewer. I want you to pause for a moment and reflect. Think about the moments you felt drained, obligated, or trapped. Think about the situations where you acted out of guilt rather than choice. Think about the interactions where someone's subtle influence dictated your energy or decisions. You are not alone. I've seen this pattern, and countless men experience it every day. And here's the thing, awareness is the only way out. I want you to share your experiences in the comments. I don't want complaints. I want reflection. Did you ever feel controlled, even subtly, in your relationships, friendships, or work? Did you notice moments when your decisions weren't truly yours? If you've experienced this, write it down. Because I read these comments, and I reach out whenever I can. This channel isn't about preaching from above. It's about understanding patterns together. It's about noticing the invisible forces at play and learning how to respond deliberately, with awareness and self-respect. Here's the final, very controversial truth for this video. Most men lose influence, respect, and energy not because they are weak, but because they overextend themselves emotionally in the wrong directions. They invest in people or situations that quietly exploit patience, loyalty, and kindness. They tolerate influence disguised as care. They obey guilt disguised as responsibility. And the moment they recognize it, it's too late, or at least painful to repair. But the good news? Awareness changes everything. The moment you notice, you can start reclaiming control, and you can do it without anger, without bitterness, but with deliberate clarity. Remember this. You don't need to stop caring. You need to start choosing. Choose when to respond, choose when to engage, and choose when to step back. Emotional blackmail only has power when your choices are unconsciously guided by guilt, obligation, or fear of conflict. Take back your decisions. Protect your energy. Assert your boundaries. And watch how the dynamic shifts. So, leave a comment sharing your experiences. Reflect, write honestly, and know that I see your perspective. I reach out when I can because this isn't just a lesson. It's a conversation. Together, we can recognize patterns, reclaim power, and operate with awareness. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be this. No one controls you without your consent. And the moment you understand that, you stop being a victim of invisible influence and start being the author of your own life.